Grace and peace, beloved of God. It's Apostle Cheryl Richardson here. We are back with another episode of Shatter the Silence, our domestic violence awareness and prevention campaign that the Lord has mandated us to start. Hey, Katie. Thanks for joining. Please share. So I'm gonna try to improve in my ability to remind people to share, right? Because I'm not really good at that. Hey, Jason and Kelly, yay! So I appreciate you all coming on. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and although I think it's amazing that we take a month out of the year to really focus on domestic violence, I think it's important to understand that it is a nightmare 12 months out of every single year and every single day of the year, okay? And so thank you for sharing. Today we're going to be talking about teen dating violence, or TDV. We're going to be talking about teen dating violence. So I'm going to just wait a couple of minutes to give people a chance to come on so that I don't have to repeat myself too much. And I pray that you all are doing well, and just know that I'm praying for you all. When we're not on the broadcast, I'm absolutely praying for you that the Lord will continue to bless and strengthen and keep you and meet every need and continue to grow you up in Him, all right? And because it's His desire to have a personal relationship with us, okay? And so one of the reasons that we are so committed to talking about domestic violence is because our mantle is to address those things that hinder and hamper the people of God. And this is a huge problem, as you've heard me say before, even within the church, across denominational lines, okay? And so it's important that we address it. It's important that we address it. And let me see. I'm going to try to tag some folks because I don't always remember to do that either. And we're going to see who can join us. And if someone wants to chime in or wants to actually come on this broadcast with me, then that's fine. Just let me know. Push the little button that says, hey, pick me, I want to come on. And I'll be more than happy to have you come on and share your thoughts, your wisdom concerning domestic violence in general or teen dating violence in particular. And just let me know. Just let me know. So prayerfully, you all have been having an amazing weekend. This year is almost gone. I can't believe it. I cannot believe how rapidly this year has gone. And a lot has happened, for sure, at least on this side. And we just thank God, though, for His faithfulness to us, and for His word and for His character, because He doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forevermore, right? And so we can count on Him when we can't count on ourselves to be consistent. We can count on His character, and we can count on the fact that what He wants is what's best for us. Amen. And so I'm just grateful for that consistency. I'm trying to tag some folks here so that we can go ahead and get started. I'm going to make sure I invite people because sometimes I don't remember to do this. So you all feel free to share, tag, do a watch party, whatever it is you feel so inclined to do. We are excited about the vision that God has given us. It's a little overwhelming, honestly, just being transparent. It's absolutely something that's going to take Him to accomplish. It's not anything that I've ever conceived of in my mind. But then when I think back over my life and my experiences and what He has brought me through, then I understand things really kind of come into alignment. And things that I've experienced in the past, things that I've been exposed to in the past, things that I have survived in the past, make a little bit more sense now. You know, sometimes you're going through stuff and you don't know why you're going through. It doesn't make any sense to you. You don't understand. It's like, why is this happening to me? What in creation is going on, right? And so I've invited a bunch of folk, and hopefully they'll invite some other folk. Hey, Pam. Hi, Annette. Blessings to you. So today we're going to be talking about, hey, Ree. We've been besties since we were like 13. I appreciate her. Okay. All right. So I wave to a bunch of people. So charge it to my head and not my heart if I don't get to wave to everybody that comes on, okay? So we're going to be talking about teen dating violence. I am Apostle Cheryl L. Richardson. I am a career mental health professional. I am an apostle in the Lord's Church. I have like 5 degrees, and I don't think that's important. These are things that God told me to do so that I would have credibility when I began to do the things that He actually called me to do, okay? So we're talking about teen dating violence. And I remember that last week, one of my dear friends, Eloise Bryant, I don't think she's on here yet, commented on something that I posted. When I posted the announcement for this particular session, she commented that this is where it all begins. And aside from domestic violence that children experience within the home, this is absolutely where it begins, okay? And so teen dating violence is a type of intimate partner violence, all right? And you will hear the terms domestic violence and intimate partner violence or domestic abuse used interchangeably. So it's all the same thing, okay? It's someone that is close to an individual, exploiting that position, and exerting harm and control and power over that individual, okay? But there's a closeness, there's a proximity that has to be present in order for the relationship to be exploited. And it's important to remember that. Now, according to the Centers for Disease Control, adolescents and adults are often unaware that teens experience dating violence. How many of you, now some of you on here are therapists or have worked in mental health, and we've worked together, so I know you know. So, for the other folk, who maybe don't work in mental health, who don't work in the helping professions, how many of you are aware that teen dating violence is a major problem, even here in the United States? How many of you were aware of that? And how many of you were thinking, what? How is that possible? And so we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about what it looks like. We're going to talk about how to prevent it. And I think for those who are believers especially, or whatever context that you base your life in, right? Whatever your core values are, if you have children, and I have 4 of my own, and then there are many that I've raised that weren't mine biologically, and many that I've poured into over the years, and many that I've treated even as a clinician. But when you're dealing with young people, and understanding how impressionable they are, if you are a normal, healthy human being, okay, let's just make that the standard. If you're a normal, healthy human being, then what you want is what's best for them, right? You want them to grow up and to be healthy and to make positive choices and to contribute to society in a positive manner. You want them to be someone that someone can like besides you, right? Someone who brings something and adds something to society and doesn't take away or denigrate or harm others. And so you make decisions and you make choices that you believe are best, right? Based on a lot of things, based on your own upbringing, based on your own experiences, kind of tempered with your own upbringing, whatever conclusion you come to concerning how you could improve upon or perfect what your parents did with you, or a sense of what you felt you may have been missing or lacking and wanting your children to have what you didn't have, right? So you want them to do at least as well as you did, but you really want them to surpass you and to do better, right? And to be contributing members of society. And so then based on those things, right, and armed with the information and the knowledge and the experience that you have at that time, keeping in mind that children basically don't come with a how-to manual. If you're a believer, then you look to the Word of God and you try to teach them those principles, and more importantly, you try to live those principles out in front of them. It's important to remember that you can only teach them what you understand yourself at that time, right? And you can only teach them, even if you are the best intentioned person in the world, you can only teach them what you've come to believe is true and right and in line, even with the Word of God, at that point in your life. Now, hopefully, we all continue to grow and develop. And as you get further down the road, you look back and say, I really thought that this was the case, but now I'm thinking it's more like that, right? So we're constantly adjusting, making adjustments. And I say all of that to say you do the very best you can with what you have. and you hope that by the end of this thing that you got it right for the most part. All right. And there's some expectation that maybe there's some things that you could have done better, or some things that you wouldn't have done at all had you known better. But you want to at least be able to say that you did what you thought was right at that time, that was sincerely your thought, your belief, and this is what you sincerely thought was best for your child, right? So oftentimes what happens, and this is not in my notes at all, oftentimes what happens, especially with spiritual people, right? Or people who profess Christ and have this standard of living that applies to every area of our lives. We, even in our interpretation of the Word of God, that changes and develops and deepens the longer you're in relationship with Him, right? And the more He takes you from experience to experience, and the more you begin to experience the fullness of His character and His faithfulness and how He's unchanging. How many of us can say that we firmly believe today what we believed when we first came into relationship with Christ? Hopefully we've learned some things and made some adjustments, right? And so when you think about the context in which teen dating violence occurs, it occurs in the context in which a parent or caregiver or guardian is still learning and growing and developing and trying to figure out, how do you raise this human and how do you keep them safe, and how do you impart values to them that are going to serve them in their life, right? And going to help them to be a contributing member of society in a positive sense. How are we going to do that? How are we going to accomplish that? Okay. And then you factor in the normal teen shenanigans, where they start listening more to their peers than they do to their parents or guardians. In a lot of cases where they're seeking the approval of their friends, where they're seeking the approval, of their peers. And that's a normal part of development. Here is something that I think is important for us to grasp, especially those who are believers. That balance is important. If we are extremely rigid in terms of what kids can do and cannot do, then it makes what the enemy has to offer that much more appealing and much more interesting. Why? Because it's forbidden, right? And this is a problem that mankind has had since the beginning of time. If it's forbidden, we automatically get curious about it. We want to look at it. We want to handle it. We want to experience it. And if you're a teenager, then you're convinced at some point in your life, especially when you hit about between 15 and 17, you're convinced that your parents are old fogies and that their main purpose in life is to keep you from having fun, right? And that they don't know what they're talking about because they've not kept up with the times. And they don't know your friend Ray Ray. They don't know your friend Annie and how amazing they are. Even if they do a little drugs, even if they do have sex before marriage, even if they do, bully other kids at school. But at the core of who they are, now listen to what I'm saying, at the core of who they are, they're a good person. Where'd they get that idea? Where did they get the idea that at the core of a person is goodness? And see, a lot of times believers are guilty of imparting that to their children when in fact, the Word of God says the opposite. That we're all kind of jacked up, I'm paraphrasing, internally from the time that we get here, right? From the time that we are shaped in our mother's womb, we got issues. And we need Jesus to bring some balance to that. And so what we will do is, if we teach our children what man has said as opposed to what the Bible actually says, we set them up to have problems. Because then, if I've taught my children that all people are good, which is not the same as all people have value. Now, I tried to instill purposefully in my children that all people have value. Every single life has a value. We don't get to devalue a human life, period, ever, okay? That is not the same thing as saying that all people are good. And so you want to be careful about whoever I'm talking to right now. You want to be careful about what it is you're actually teaching your children. Because what happens is, when it doesn't line up with the Word of God, in a scripturally sound way, when we misappropriate the scripture, or when we we intermingle it with fairy tales and truths and things that grandma said, right? We set them up for problems. We set them up for problems. People don't wander off into abusive situations intentionally. The goal in my life is to be sexually and physically and verbally battered. That's my goal. But people, that's not how that works. Okay, so we want to look at what is happening that primes them for this. Okay, so if the environment that they're being raised in is too sterile, and all they ever hear about is the upright person who never does anything wrong, who never makes a mistake, who's in church every time the door opens, who belongs to the choir and the whatever other committee that the church has, that they're active in student council and they do this and that and the third, and they don't know anything about the fact that there's another type of person that exists in the world, then when they come in contact with this person that they've not been exposed to because we're trying to protect them, they're fascinated by the drama. They're fascinated by the fearlessness. They're fascinated by the fact that they break rules and seem okay with it, you know, and people listen to them and they have all this power and authority and they are fascinated by it. And so they're fascinated because they didn't know it existed. And they're fascinated because they don't understand how detrimental that it is, okay? And so this can follow us all the way into adulthood. This can follow us all the way into adulthood. If we're dealing with a fairy tale mentality in terms of other humans and what they're capable of, then we're not prepared for what we encounter sometimes in real life, and it can impact us, even in terms of our mental health. Okay, so it's important to understand that, you know, if you're raising children now, you want to have balance. They need to know that there is evil in the world, that there is bad in the world. They need to understand that all people have value, not that all people are good, because all people are not good. Some people are critters. Some people are just critters, okay? All right, so a lot of adults and adolescents don't even understand that teen dating violence is a thing, that it even occurs, all right? It includes 4 types of behavior, and this will sound familiar because, again, teen dating violence is another form of intimate partner violence, okay? If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat. And what I will do, I promise, when I'm done, I will go back and answer every single question, okay? I promise. All right. If you want to come on, then let me know. Let me know. Hey, cousin. I see my cousin on here. I love her. And lots of people that I appreciate your support, okay? And please keep us in prayer. All right. So there are 4 types of behavior that make up teen dating violence. And like I said, they're familiar because it's intimate partner violence just with people who are much, much younger. So physical violence is when a person hurts or tries to hurt a partner by hitting, kicking, or using some other kind of physical force, right? That's the kind of violence that we more readily recognize as abusive. It's more easily categorized, right, as being wrong and being inappropriate. And so then you have sexual violence. Now, sexual violence is forcing or attempting to force a partner to participate in a sex act, sexual touching, or even a non-physical sexual event such as sexting when the partner does not or cannot connect, okay? So sexting, unwanted sexting is sexually aggressive and it's sexual violence, okay? It's just non-contact, okay? But emotionally, mentally, it's very damaging, certainly if it's unwanted. All right, then you have psychological aggression, which is very, very difficult to quantify. It's hard to prove it sometimes, right? And this is the aspect that causes people to feel like a little crazy and like nobody will believe me if I tell them this. You know, this person is saying these things or doing these things to me, but they're on the honor roll and they're on the football team or they're a cheerleader or they're in student council and all the teachers love them and all of that. But then when we're alone, then these other things are occurring. All right. So the similar problem, a similar challenge to what adults feel when they're dealing with domestic violence. Who's going to believe me? And given who it is, it may be difficult for the victim to even convince themselves that they're being abused, okay? So when we look at psychological aggression, it is the use of verbal and nonverbal communication with the intent to harm another person mentally or emotionally and or exert control over another person. Again, psychological aggression is the use of verbal and nonverbal communication with the intent to harm another person mentally or emotionally and or exert control over another person. So you're trying to get them to do something. You are trying to get them to feel a certain way. You are after a particular response, all right? And it's intentional. Now, here's a trap that sometimes people fall into, even if they're not a teen. Well, they didn't mean it. So this is why boundaries are important. So if you think someone said or did something and they didn't mean it, say this to them. That is not okay. That was hurtful. That was inappropriate. And I need for you not to do that again. If they do it again, it's intentional. There you go. Okay. If they do it again, it's intentional. It's intentional. All right. We shouldn't have to make excuses for people who actually have no intention of harming us, because the behavior should not be repetitive. Okay. Should not be repetitive. There should be some accepting of responsibility followed closely by a change in behavior. And if those two things don't happen in close succession, then that's shenanigans, okay? And it was intentional, okay? Now, number 4, stalking. We talked about stalking recently in another broadcast, and it's very, very involved, and we're going to probably revisit it because there's some other things that we really think it's important for you to know, all right? Stalking is a pattern. It's important. Now, it's a pattern of repeated, unwanted attention and contact by a partner that causes fear or concern for one's own safety or the safety of someone close to the victim. Okay? It's a pattern of repeated, unwanted attention and contact by a partner. We talked about in our previous session about how it can be done in the form of cyberbullying, infiltrating your social media accounts or sending things. And, teens like Snapchat, so they'll use Snapchat a lot. So there's a whole lot of abuse that can happen on Snapchat because after 24 hours it goes away, so there's no evidence that they did it. You know what I'm saying? So it's important that you monitor your teens' social media platforms. Are they going to be thrilled about that? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They're not. Okay? But it's important that you understand who they're interacting with and to what extent. Now, for those of you who say, I have a good relationship with my kids and we talked about this and that and the other, I can tell you from my own experience, and I can tell you from treating kids for years and years, that they may have a close relationship with you. And they may be so close to you, right, that they don't want to disappoint you, that they don't want you to look at them differently, that they don't want to hurt you or to cause you undue stress or undue drama. And so they won't tell you. So again, all these things that we've been taught about, talk to your kids and establish this relationship. And, I remember in our house, we had family meetings. We talked about everything. We talked about stuff that the kids didn't even want to talk about. It was like, Mama, do we really? Yes, we absolutely really do have to talk about this. We do. And so let's go. And that's what we did, right? But even then, there were things that the Lord had to reveal to me because they didn't tell me. And it wasn't because they didn't think they could talk to me, because we talked all the time. But oftentimes kids will, and this is for someone in particular, kids will, in an attempt to protect you, right? To protect you, they won't share things with you. That coupled with they're trying to come into their own and trying to gain their own independence and their own sense of self and how they're separate from you and making their own choices. And these are probably all things that you taught them, right? We encourage them to think for themselves, to use their mind, to make decisions and use their best judgment. And then, compare notes. Did this go well? What could I have done differently? So they can actually use the things that we teach them to keep them safe and apply them to us as well. Okay? And sometimes when they do, they end up not sharing. And so it's not always a negative, secretive, rebellious thing. Sometimes it's an attempt to protect you. Sometimes it's an attempt to protect that vision that you have of whoever this other person is, whoever the abuser is, or whatever family they come from, or whatever, and they may not share, okay? And so it's important for you to know that and to kind of know what to look for. As we've discussed in previous Facebook Lives, cyberbullying is a major, major problem, and oftentimes teens will even commit suicide. They will contemplate suicide, they will begin to self-harm, and it's because of things that are being said about them on social media that if you're not monitoring their social media platforms, their accounts, you have no idea that this stuff is happening. Okay? And oftentimes they feel like they can handle it because we've taught them that they can handle anything, right? And that God is with them, and they won't share, And so it's important that we pay attention and not rely solely on the fact that, oh, we're close and so they'll tell me, okay? Sometimes the fact that you're close will be the reason that they don't tell you. Sometimes the reason that they don't tell you is because they love you, not because they're trying to be rebellious, not because they're trying to be renegades, but because they're trying to protect you, right? Hey, Stephen. All right. Ernestine Dickerson, always glad to see you. Okay, so we've talked about the 4 major areas when we're talking about teen dating violence are physical violence, right? Sexual violence, which can be physical contact or non-physical, which typically will involve cyberbullying, posting videos, posting things on social media that are sexually explicit, that are exploitive. We've talked about psychological aggression, and we've talked about stalking as the 4 main things, okay, that comprise teen dating violence, all right? Women 18 to 24 are the demographic that most often experience domestic violence. Now, we know that from just talking about domestic violence in general, right? Women 18 to 24 are the demographic that most often experience it. So now the question becomes, what makes them prime for that? They're just exiting the home. They're exiting that overarching protection of their parent or guardian. They are probably out on their own. They're in college or now they're working. So now they're out in the world, armed with their interpretation of what they've been taught about interacting with other people, what their own value is as an individual. And so they're out there on their own and they're incredibly vulnerable. So this is when the rubber meets the road. Okay? This is when they get to apply all that's been poured into them, all that's been taught to them, all that has been modeled before them, and all that they have experienced, all right? Oftentimes teens think that behaviors such as like name calling, right, or teasing, wrestling, that these are normal behaviors. They think this is normal. The problem is that these behaviors roll over into more abusive behaviors oftentimes in relationships. And if when they are preteens and teens, they think it's okay for the name calling, the teasing, you know, the bullying, that they think that these things are okay and that these things are appropriate and there are no consequences for them, they are then primed for a more aggressive version of those same behaviors, okay? Hey, Kim. Miss you. Okay. Let's look at some statistics. These statistics are mind-blowing, all right? It's important to know that this is a huge problem. It affects millions, not hundreds, but millions of teens, even here in the United States, all right? Every single year. Nearly 1 in 11 female high school students report having experienced physical dating violence in the past year. 1 in 11. Nearly 1 in 11 have experienced physical dating violence, which means physical aggression, slapping, hitting, pushing, strangulation. I mean, that they've experienced that in the past year, okay? And then approximately 1 in 15 male high school students report having experienced physical dating violence in the past year. So again, it's important to know that victims are not only female, right? That men and boys can be victims as well. It's important, and I try to say this every week, that anyone can be a victim and anyone can be an abuser. This cuts across socioeconomic, educational, your IQ, your intelligence, your pedigree, the kind of family you came from, how much money they had. If you grew up in a homeless shelter or grew up in a mansion, it matters not, okay? Anyone can be a victim and anyone can be an abuser. Now, about 1 in 9 female high school students report having experienced sexual dating violence in the past year. 1 in 9 have experienced sexual dating violence, okay? For those of you who have kids who are now preteens or teens, who you may know are dating, oftentimes you don't even know that they're dating, okay? And so close monitoring is important so that you can understand what your child is actually engaged in, what are they involved in, all right? But about 1 in 9 female high school students report having experienced sexual dating violence in the past year. 1 in 9. Think sexual dating violence. We're beyond the name calling, okay? Beyond the name calling. And remember, when we talked about sexual dating violence, it can be non-physical contact, okay? It can be sexting. It can be cyberbullying, okay? It can be forcing them into being in a video or whatever. Just making them do things that they don't want to do, right? And that's important. Now let's look at the spiritual component to that. Like the Bible says flee fornication, right? So it completely says do not engage in extramarital sexual relationships, right? The reason for that is not because God just does not want people to have fun. The reason for that is there are things established in the realm of the spirit that a spiritual person, right, or a believer might call a soul tie. Think back. You don't have to type anything in the chat, but just think back, right? And be honest with yourself in your own mind, right? If you were sexually active as a preteen or as a teen because you had a boyfriend or a girlfriend you were dating or whatever, okay, how difficult was it for you to receive direction from your parent after that occurred? Because what happens is the most important person to you becomes the person that you are soul tied to, the person that you have established that bond with, right? And so you may hear advice from others. You may hear advice from well-meaning people that you were close to. But what you will find is you're probably not as close after sexual activity occurs. And so this is why the Bible says not to do it. Not because God doesn't want anybody to have any fun, but because you give control of yourself to a very large degree, an ability to be deeply influenced to another individual who may not even share your value system. Okay? And so once kids become sexually active, it is very, very hard to talk to them. They may rear up at you. They may become rebellious. They may become more secretive. It's hard. It's hard. And the reality of it is adults struggle with this very same thing. People who are sexually intimate outside of marriage, right, find themselves committed to, dedicated to, influenced by whoever they've been intimate with. And that's just how it goes, okay? And this is why it's important that young people are taught to be in control of their own body, right? And you want them to feel comfortable saying if something has happened that they are uncomfortable with. All right. 1 in 36 male high school students report having experienced sexual dating violence in the past year. And again, we know that girls can be abusers as well, right? Certainly a girl who's grown up in an abusive household can be an abuser, all right? As well as being primed to be a victim later on in her own life cycle. So it's important to note that grown men drastically underreport domestic violence for reasons that we've discussed in previous broadcasts, right? So how much more do you think a teenage boy is going to report that he's been sexually violated? Is he really, how comfortable is he going to be sharing that information with anyone, all right? Hey, Dexter. All right, let's some more statistics. We're still talking about teen dating violence. 26% of women and 15% of men who were victims of contact sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime first experienced these or other forms of violence by that partner before age 18. So it starts, what primes us to get into this cycle of victimization typically happens before age 18. Typically happens before age 18. So the things that happen to us in our formative years, when we are children, we've talked about in the past how if a child is exposed to domestic violence, how vulnerable it makes them, because then they go through life seeking the next person that's going to hurt them. And it's just something that happens in the brain, all right? We know that psychologically and emotionally that there is a halting to normal growth and development that happens when we experience trauma at an early age, which is why oftentimes you will deal with people who are 40 or 50 years old, and their response to an unpleasant situation or hearing no is like that of a 9 or 10-year-old. You know, they're stomping around, they're throwing things, because typically something has happened that has caused them not to continue to develop in terms of being able to deal with disappointment or being upset or hearing no in an age-appropriate manner, okay? So, again, 26% of women and 15% of men who were victims of contact sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime first expressed these or other forms of violence. They experienced it by that partner before the age of 18. So what happens from birth to 18 is vitally important. It really, really impacts our trajectory from a mental, emotional, social standpoint going forward in our life. How we make our decisions, what value we place on ourselves, what value we place on others, what we feel is right and wrong, who we feel we can trust, if we trust anyone at all, okay? It's been found that teen dating violence is not a burden that is shared equally across all groups. So it's been found that sexual minority groups are disproportionately affected by all forms of violence, and some racial ethnic minority groups are disproportionately affected by many types of violence, okay? What are the consequences? What are the consequences to teen dating violence, okay? Teens who have experienced dating violence, hey, Prophet Melanie, they are more likely to experience symptoms of depression and anxiety. So these are the things that you can look for in your young people, whether you are a Sunday school teacher, whether you are a pastor, apostle, prophet, parent, or whatever. If you notice these things, then it is an indication that more exploration needs to happen. And even when you ask them, they may not tell you because they're trying to protect you, or because they're embarrassed, or because they feel responsible somehow. They feel complicit. They feel that they shouldn't have gotten into this in the first place because you taught them not to, and then they did it, and now this is what happened. So as with many adults, okay, it can be challenging to accept responsibility for something that you started off maybe violating some rules that you were aware of, okay? And so just keep that in mind. But these are some of the things that you can look for in your young people. They may experience symptoms of depression or anxiety, right? They may engage in unhealthy behaviors like using tobacco, drugs, alcohol, even vaping, because kids think that vaping is not as harmful as tobacco, although now studies are beginning to indicate that it's pretty deadly. And the reality of it is we don't even know until we get 30 or 40 years down the road what the long-term impacts of vaping can be on the pulmonary system, on your lungs, right? And so when they start engaging in risky behaviors, they may exhibit antisocial behavior. Now, when we're talking about antisocial behavior from a clinical standpoint, we're not talking about, I don't want to go to the party, I don't want to hang out with the other girls. We're not talking about that, okay? That's more depressive symptomology, all right? We're talking about lying. We're talking about stealing. We're talking about bullying, hitting other people, right? Just being blatantly disrespectful. These are things that can absolutely happen, that can take place. And when you see them, they're being caused by something. The other thing that may surface are thoughts of suicide. So if they journal, they might journal about it. You might hear them listening to music that kind of minimizes the seriousness of suicide, or encourages it even, right? You may find that they are Googling, that they are exploring, that they are reading about suicide. And so these are all very, very important signals that something is going on that should not be going on, okay? All right. Teen dating violence sets the stage for problematic future relationships, including intimate partner violence, sexual violence, perpetration, and or victimization throughout the remainder of the life cycle. So, when a teen is exposed to dating violence, there's a very real chance that they were primed for it by childhood domestic violence, or that they were so sheltered that they are fascinated by this behavior that is the polar opposite of what their parent or guardian thinks is appropriate, okay? The fact that as adults we are appalled by it makes it really interesting to kids. And so it's important that we talk to them and that it's presented in a sense of balance. All people are not good. Think about, what are you teaching your children? All people are not good. It sounds nice and warm and fuzzy, but it's completely inaccurate, right? And the Bible declares that from the very beginning, we're all a hot mess. I'm paraphrasing. Okay. All right. I'm going to read that again because it's important. Teen dating violence sets the stage for problematic future relationships, including intimate partner violence. It sets the stage for sexual violence. It sets the stage for the teen to become a perpetrator themselves or to be further victimized throughout the remainder of the life cycle, right? And so a lot of times we think about childhood domestic violence, or we think about teen dating violence, and we think, well, I don't want them to grow up and be a victim. They could grow up and be a perpetrator. They can grow up and hurt other people on purpose, right? Because of what they've been exposed to. Okay. Youth who are TDV victims in high school are more likely to, and at a higher risk of being victimized in college. So when you think about it, if they've been exposed to it in high school and they're still in your house, they're still under your care, what kind of framework do they have in place to sidestep this, to avoid these kinds of relationships when they are in college and in a completely different environment where there is no dedicated person kind of hovering over them as they move through every single day, right? They've got different professors, different rooms, different groups of people. They're going to come into contact with so many different people from so many different walks of life. Some of who have domestic violence in their background. Some who don't. Some who are great kids and some who are not so nice, right? Some who are antisocial. Some who are genuinely amazing people. But this is the point at which they get to use what they've been taught at home. They get to use what they have experienced, and they shape that into what they feel like it should look like when they navigate life. And so these are the things that they put into place, right? And so once they leave home, you are less able now to protect them or to impact how they're thinking, right? Which is pretty scary if you're a parent. It's pretty challenging if you're a parent, okay? All right. During preteen and teen years, it's important for young people to learn the skills needed to create and encourage healthy relationships. When I think about this, I think about how the Treasury Department, how they train people, how they train their staff to identify counterfeit bills, right? They don't try to learn and memorize every single way that a bill can be counterfeit. all the different things, all the different inks, all the different mistakes that people commonly make. They study and become expert at what's right. What does a genuine bill look like? These are the components of a genuine bill. Anything outside of this is suspect, okay? And that's probably the best way to raise and rear children, preteens and teens. This is what a healthy relationship looks like. This is what it contains, right? And so that anything that doesn't line up with that is suspect. If it doesn't look like this, it's suspect. If it causes you to feel less than, if it causes you to feel depressed, if it causes you to feel denigrated, disrespected, that's not genuine and that's not healthy, okay? And so we need more emphasis on what it looks like when it's right. What does it look like when it's right? And anything that doesn't fit this, something's wrong with it, okay? It desires further scrutiny, okay? So, during preteen and teen years, it's important for young people to learn the skills needed to create and encourage healthy relationships, how to manage their feelings, how to have healthy communication, setting healthy boundaries. These are all very, very important. If you start teaching children at an early age how to set a healthy boundary, how to say no, and not feel bad because you had to say no, right? Be willing to say it's no and this is why. And understand that you have a right to say that. You have a right to keep yourself safe. You have a right to say no simply because you want to say no this time, right? Managing their feelings, having healthy communication. And so this is important. And these are skills that are typically normally developed in the preteen to teenage years. But you can really start even younger than that, right? And so if we do that, then we have equipped them to better navigate these challenges and to recognize a snake when they come into contact with one. No matter how beautiful the skin might be, that is still a snake, right? And we don't do snakes, okay? So, the Center for Disease Control has developed, and I think this is amazing, but the Center for Disease Control has developed a Dating Matters program. And it is strategies to promote healthy teen relationships to stop TDV before it starts, right? And the best way to deal with it is to stop it before it starts. Because if you don't stop it before it starts, then now you're responding to something, to a young person who's already been damaged, who's already been hurt, who's already been traumatized, okay? It focuses on 11 to 14-year-olds, and it involves multiple prevention components for individuals, peers, families, schools, and even neighborhoods. So, someone put this up, I'd appreciate it. The website is www.cdc.gov. www.cdc.gov. And then you want to look for Dating Matters. But again, they've got this program that they developed to prevent teen dating violence before it even starts. It focuses on 11 to 14-year-olds, which is a prime time, right before they ease into that greater sense of independence, right? And they have components that address individuals, peers, families, schools, and neighborhoods so that you can implement programs individually, in your household, in your community, in your neighborhood, that will help to prevent teen dating violence and to educate young people, okay? They developed the Dating Matters Toolkit, and the purpose is to provide everything that you need to launch a system, the Dating Matters Comprehensive Program. So it addresses teen dating violence prevention, and it's a model that you can even use in your community, all right? It consists of a guide to implementation, okay? So it guides local health departments or other lead community-based groups in planning and implementing the model. Okay, so if you're someone who wants to do this in your community, if you're someone that's involved with the health department, these are all programs that can be implemented on that level. It includes a coach's playbook, which guides coaches in overseeing and supporting the youth and parent program facilitators. So this program consists of also a portion where you have facilitators that consist of the young people and that also consist of the parents. Okay, so this is something that families can do together. They have online training for youth and parent facilitators, which is free. And then they have a Team Up for Dating Matters, which is an online community for everyone that is implementing the program on either the community level, right, or in your own home. So it's go to the cdc.gov website, look for Dating Matters, and they've got the whole program laid out that you can implement. Okay, all right. And I was so excited about that. Now I want to touch on something that I really became familiar with when the Lord sent me to Alaska, to Chris Kyle Patriot Hospital, and we helped to open that facility up there for active duty military and veterans. And it is about adverse childhood experiences, because this is something that we used up there in terms of training people, in Alaska, and helping us to better serve our patients that we had up there. So in the 1990s, there was a landmark study that found that there is a significant link between negative childhood experiences, but certainly teen dating violence would qualify to be one of those, okay? So there's a significant link between negative childhood experience and chronic health problems later in life. So we understand that there can be mental health problems later in life, but also there is a link between adverse childhood experiences and actual physical health issues later on in life, okay? So ongoing research into adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, we call them ACEs, has found that the more ACEs a person has, the more likely they are to develop, are you ready for this? Heart disease, cancer, chronic lung diseases, depression, substance abuse, or to even end up incarcerated. So the more adverse childhood experiences that a person has, the more likely they are to develop heart disease, cancer, chronic lung diseases, depression, substance abuse, or even end up incarcerated. The ACE test is a 10-question quiz, so it's not like a deep, in-depth, gut-wrenching thing. It's just 10 questions. It provides guidance for further intervention, okay? So it's not an end-all, be-all, but it gives you an indication of how much trauma you have experienced in your life, and may shed some light on why you are susceptible to certain things, even as an adult, even in your physical body, okay? Okay, now, having said that, having a teacher or a coach or some adult in your life who encourages you and kind of undergirds you and positively reinforces you can mitigate or kind of take the edge off of some of these childhood experiences. And I know that for myself, just being transparent, the household that I grew up in was wackadoodle. I mean, it was off the chain. It was off the chain. When it was off the chain, it was off the chain. But when you looked at it from the outside, it was a model home, beautiful home, cutting edge furnishings, all the newest toys before all the other kids. It was a marvelous from the outside. But when the door closed, it was a whole nother situation, all right? But what mitigated this for me, and I look at it as really divine intervention for me from a very small child, is that there was always someone in my life. And my mom certainly was always a cheerleader for me, but there was always someone else that had nothing to do with the craziness that was going on that would tell me that I could be anything that I wanted to be, that I was smart, right? And that they would give me additional responsibilities in the classroom. And I remember being the editor of the 4th grade newspaper, right? And having this construction paper button ribbon that my teacher had made, and that I would wear it when I went to school, and I would go home and things were crazy. But when I was in school, people would tell me that I was smart, right? And that I was a good girl, and that I could do anything that I wanted to do. And I had an uncle, right, who was more like a father than an uncle. He was my mother's brother, her younger brother, and he always called me Doc. right? He always called me Doc. He always told me how smart I was. He tried to teach me how to play classical piano, but I wouldn't sit still long enough for him to teach me. I wish I had sat my hips down now, but I couldn't sit still that long. That was too much sitting for me. But my point is that God was able to, even though there was toxic, crazy stuff going on, there were people in my life who countered it, right? Who countered it. And so it speaks to why isolation is so devastating when someone is involved in a toxic situation, because it negates any opportunity to hear anything that counters the negativity that you're hearing all of the time. So even in my household dysfunction, education, the importance of education was constantly like drilled into us, that education was important. It was drilled into me by my father that it was important that I always do my best, at work, that people should know me, not because, and I quote, not because I kissed their behind. Now, I don't know why we were having this conversation when I was 8, but this is when this conversation happened, okay? But because I was so good at what I did, that they had to know who I was, that they would know me by name. And so that was something that was always drilled into me in the midst of all this toxicity, even from the person who was responsible for much of the toxicity, okay? So my point is that when we come into contact with young people, when we come into contact with young adults who may be experiencing intimate partner violence or TDV and not even sharing it, if we can just uplift them and undergird them, draw their attention to what they're good at, what their strengths are, the confidence that you have in them, all right? It makes a tremendous difference. It can take the edge off of whatever they may be experiencing behind closed doors. And so that's one way that we can all be involved, to be more focused on lifting them up, right? And encouraging them beyond their physical appearance, because that's not something that they have any control over. But you want to talk to them and praise them and undergird them regarding the innate qualities that they have, the things that they are innately good at, the things that make them who they are beyond their physical appearance. Okay, and so I just wanted to say that. So we're talking about adverse childhood experiences, right? The ACE test is a 10-question quiz. It provides guidance for further intervention. And as I said, if you have someone in your life, hey Cassie, happy friendversary. According to Facebook, we've been friends on Facebook for 2 years. Okay. We don't know yet what the exact mechanism is that connects childhood trauma to negative physical health outcomes later on in life, but it seems like it's connected to that whole fight or flight syndrome that we experience when we are in a traumatic situation. Okay, so when we feel threatened, it activates that fight or flight response, which increases our heart rate, right, and increases our blood pressure, and stress hormones like cortisol are released. Now, we know that when you have excessive amounts of cortisol, then there's a tendency to hold on to weight, and then you start to develop health problems because of the additional weight, right? So there are consequences to not being able to properly process stress and not being able to properly process trauma. All right? Kids normally learn to manage stress as a basic part of growing up. But if they live in a high stress environment, if they live in a stressful environment or an uncertain environment, of course that interferes with their ability to learn how to manage it, because they never really get a break from it, right? An estimated 45% of female juvenile offenders have an ACE score of 5 or higher, and 31% were sexually abused prior to incarceration. So we know that teen dating violence has a negative impact on the life cycle of the teen, whether they are male or female, going forward. We know that childhood domestic violence sets the stage and primes them for teen dating violence and domestic violence victimization or perpetration as an adult. And what I want us to think about, those of us who are believers, what are you saying to your child? What are you telling them? Are you telling them that all people are good? There's a difference between all people are good and all people have value. That's two completely different things. And so understand that the enemy will use those things that you believe to be true, those things that you base your life on, and he will try to get you, even as an adult, into a position where you feel like you're violating that if you make a healthy choice, right? If you make a healthy choice, which is why many of us struggle with saying no, right? We struggle with having appropriate boundaries because we feel like we're being mean or we're not being understanding and we're not being supportive, but we're not thinking about where did that thought process even come from, right? So if we teach our kids that all people are good, if we shelter them to the point where all they ever hear about or know about are people like them, they are completely unprepared when they meet the diabolical complete opposite of what lives in your house. They're not prepared for it, okay? So you want to focus on helping them to have healthy communication, helping them to be accountable, right? Helping them to set healthy boundaries, which many adults struggle with, all right? So these are the things that we can do to help prevent it. Understand that your child, no matter how close you are to them, hey Marlene, no matter how close you are to them, the fact that you're close to them may be the very reason that they don't share with you that something is hurting them. Okay, so you want to have that closeness, but you don't want to encourage them to feel responsible for your happiness. That you're going to be so devastated if they come to you with an issue or a problem, or that there's anybody in the world that you wouldn't believe is harming them, right? And so if they think that, then they won't share. If they do share, they may minimize. All right? And so we've been talking about teen dating violence. We've been talking about how prevalent it is. The fact that millions of teens are impacted by it every year, even here in the United States. Okay? It is a tremendous problem. And when it occurs, there have been instances in this country and worldwide where teens have been killed by other teens. So domestic violence, the cycle is the same, whether we're talking about kids or whether we're talking about full-grown adults. And it's deadly. It's important that we understand that. It's important that we come out of this place where we want to respect our children's privacy. You need to know if they're being mistreated. You need to know that. And you don't want to have to deal with something tragic happening and something as simple as you're reading their journal or checking their social media activity would have prevented it or given you an indication, right? So teens should not be functioning in a vacuum. They should not be functioning in a vacuum. They are still in their formative years, right? And we know because we've shared it during this broadcast that most of the victims, whether they are male or female, who have gone on to be victims or perpetrators have experienced some form of violence before they were even 18 years old. Okay? So we've been talking about teen dating violence and how prevalent it is. I encourage you, if you have kids around you, you're a Sunday school teacher, you're a school teacher, whatever, pay attention. Pay attention. If you see the indicators, if you see the signs, explore further, okay? Investigate. If you see bruises, investigate, all right? You've known this child your entire life. Have they been clumsy their entire life? I mean, you know, why are they coming home bruised? Why are they wearing long sleeves? Why are they wearing turtlenecks? Why are they withdrawn when they used to be outgoing, okay? Why are they rebellious? All right. And for those of us who are spiritual people and who profess Christ, right? If your child becomes sexually active, they're going to have a difficult time hearing you. Just know that. They're going to have a difficult time hearing you. And this is why the Bible says, flee fornication. Okay? Because it opens the door to being influenced by so many other things that do not have your best interest at heart, whether you be a child or an adult. Okay? This is Apostle Cheryl Richardson. We covered your prayers. The vision that God has given us is expanding, and it's mind-blowing and at times overwhelming. There's no way we can do it without him, and there's no way we can do it without you. We've put at the top of the Facebook Live, that if you want to partner with us, if you want to sow, this is one way that you can be actively involved in a practical way, right? In terms of stopping domestic violence, stopping these things that are damaging us and setting us up for the cycle to continue on and on and on and on and on, right? Because your kids grow up in an environment like that, they become a perpetrator or they become a victim, they will more likely than not end up connected to someone who is a perpetrator or who is a victim. And then the cycle just continues. It continues, right? Because we can only teach what we know. And so I'm encouraging you to get more involved, to pay attention, to not be so ready to accept everything's fine, everything's great. Pay attention. Pay attention. Monitor the social media platforms. Some of these platforms kids really don't even need to be on because there's not a whole lot of positivity that's taking place, right? But monitor it. Know who their friends are. Know where they are and what they are doing. Are they truly okay? If they're having a disagreement or a problem with a friend, what is the basis of that? Encourage them to process that with you so that you can help them to problem solve and to set appropriate boundaries, okay? All right. So Judah's Roar is our Cash App with the $ in front of it. And our PayPal is also Judah's Roar. We will be back on next week with another broadcast of Shatter the Silence. We are committed to crying aloud and sparing not. And we're grateful to the Lord for the invitations that we're receiving now to minister regarding this on a global level. And we want you to understand that these things that we're talking about are a problem within the church. They are occurring at greater frequency within the church than without the church across denominational lines, okay? And this should not be. This is Apostle Cheryl O. Richardson. I thank you for joining us on today. I encourage you to share, like, comment. If you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and leave your questions in the chat, and I will go back and address your questions to the best of my ability. Hey, Dr. Jen. Again, thank you for signing in, and we will see you on next week. Blessings to you.